Good evening, everybody. Everything new under the sun. Biological warfare. Based on Dr. John Campbell's video, which you see in the image there, something very interesting came out of it. And I suspect, based on this information, that what we have going on is some biological warfare. And it makes sense. How many biological warfare labs and armies and militaries are working on things. And of course, the current theory that China doesn't agree with is that COVID came out of a lab in Wuhan, and it was part of a biological warfare experiment. Them looking for something they could use for military purposes down the road, in the case of maybe World War III or something like that. Well, a scientific paper came out and looked into the origins of Omicron. Now, this is interesting, and you'll have to go watch the video. He doesn't make these inferences that I'm going to make, but I think it's interesting. And, the conspiracy theorist in you might find them interesting and quite engaging, I think. Evidence for a mouse origin of SARS-CoV-2 Omicron variant. So the big question is, where did Omicron come from? Normally we hear of variants coming out of mutations because of people are vaxxed or people are unvaxxed or whatever the reason is, mutations coming out of humans. Well, with Omicron, they didn't find that. This study, and I'll tell you who the authors are, very interesting in a bit. You can see the link at the bottom of that image there. You can go to Dr. John, and I believe this was a video published today or yesterday. But so here's a look at the variants, the various strains of COVID. And off to the bottom right, you have Delta, the various Delta variations, Delta 21J, Delta 21I, Delta 21A, etc. And they're all kind of mutating off each other, and they're on the same line or lineage. As well, you can see Alpha, top right there, and then Beta, the very top in the dark blue, and Gamma. But down at the very bottom, you have Omicron. Now, Omicron is kind of standing alone. It's not near anything else. And it's farther away, which means it's been kind of mutating for a little while in sort of separation in its own space away from these other mutations, these other variants. Interesting thing. So what they've come to find out is they believe this actually came from mice. Now, by the way, what do these people test on in labs like Wuhan? What animals do they test on? Well, some of the comments here: mutations in Omicron spike protein significantly overlap with SARS-CoV-2 mutations known to promote adaptation to mouse hosts. So Omicron was found to be really good at connecting to the ACE2 receptor. It was such a good fit, in fact. It was an amazing fit, almost a designed fit, if you will, in terms of how it infected mice so quickly. And what they suspect is that this, in fact, the disease itself, COVID, went into mice, kind of moved around inside most mice populations for a little while, and then came back to humans. And that's what this slide is. Again, you can watch the video. But the mutations were very conducive, of course. The ACE2 receptor compatibility was incredible with the mice. And then all of a sudden, it jumped from mice into humans. And they say indicating an interspecies evolutionary trajectory for Omicron outbreak. But again, the big question is, where did this come from? Omicron off to its own, and all of a sudden it's coming out now in mice, no less. Very interesting thing. And of course, evolved to increase binding, shouldn't be binging, but binding to mouse ACE2 receptors. And so this was perfectly suited to bind to those ACE2 receptors, consistent with human escape and consistent with upper airway absorption. This is where it was found. Now, interesting. Who were the writers that found that this came from mice? And why couldn't these same writers maybe why haven't any writers determined where the original virus came from? Of course, China doesn't want to admit that. But this scientific article came from Institute of Genetics and Developmental Biology, Chinese Academy of Sciences and Genetics Society of China. You can look at the bottom there. Very interesting. Is this actually the antidote to COVID? Was this planned? Why is it coming out of mice? Of all, the creatures, why don't they have it coming out of bats or something like that? Mice are the kind of the common animal that they test all sorts of things on in labs. So the fact that it's coming out of mice is interesting. The fact that this article is coming from a Chinese outlet is interesting. And that they can trace this back to mice. They can trace Omicron back to mice, but how come they can't trace Alpha back to, its original origins? I guess they say it comes from a bat, but anyways, I think it's interesting, and I kind of wonder, is there biological warfare going on? Now, nation states, countries have militaries that work on this kind of stuff. Not only do they work on the biological warfare that will kill the intended targets, but you would expect that they would also be working maybe on an antidote or kind of a way to reverse what they've released, and just in case it goes too far, right? Well, you could speculate then, and I think it's interesting, especially considering where this comes from, that in fact maybe they let it the cat out of the bag, if you will, out of the Wuhan lab. That wasn't good. That the timing wasn't right. I don't think anybody suggested that China actually meant to release this necessarily, because it hasn't really done anybody good at this point, although there's reasons to argue that as well. But I wonder if at the same time or after the release of that, they started working on an antidote, a way to solve this. And not only that, but a way to get it to get it to be mass transmissible, almost exactly like the virus, but in the opposite direction, to heal people, if you will, and to basically eradicate the original release or the original disease. And that's exactly what Omicron does. It is so transmissible, but not pathogenic, not as pathogenic. So it's much less likely to kill you. You just get cold symptoms, but it's far more transmissible. Which means, if this was intentionally developed, they knew by this method it would transmit and be released around the world so quickly you wouldn't have to get injections and all these sorts of things. You wouldn't have to deploy it. You would literally release this thing just like they released just like the first one got around, transmitting human to human. You let that out in the population, into the wild, as they say, and it just sweeps around the world and effectively ends the pandemic. And I believe Omicron is effectively ending the pandemic at this point. It's at the point where it's so transmissible, it's pushed out Delta, it's pushed out Alpha, etc., the other variants. But at the same time, it is much less pathogenic, much less likely to kill anybody. And so at the end of the day, everybody's going to have herd immunity from this. So you should listen to this video. It's very interesting. It does, to me, look like there was a biological war going on. Biological warfare is happening. And again, it looks to me like this could very well have been actually a planned release of something that someone, whoever maybe developed it, knew would end the pandemic. Maybe, and they're not going to come out and state this. The U.S., if they were developing this, they wouldn't come out and say, we're going to create something that's less deadly and let it be, and it's going to be incredibly transmissible, and we're going to release it amongst the world population. They wouldn't do that. No one would admit the antidote or the way to stop the pandemic, just like they wouldn't admit who, or why the original was released, or how it was released, or confirm or deny anything about it, really. So again, think about that. Watch the video. Was this planned? Is this a planned way to end the pandemic by releasing kind of the opposite of the original? Hold on. Mute my computer there. So yes, is this the cure? Is this an antidote? And people have been claiming, have been suggesting that Omicron is in fact the antidote or the end of the pandemic, the cure, because it's going to give us all herd immunity. And that's what Dr. John Campbell is saying as well. Effectively every single person is going to get it. You and I, no one's going to get away from this. It's just like a cold at this point. Everybody's going to get it. And so it looks very much planned to me, and it looks like exactly what a country would do. If they were creating a deadly agent, they would also create the antidote, a way to stop it, so that it didn't keep going and going and going, so that they could control the end result. Once they got the desired effect of the original infection, the original disease or pandemic, then they would be able to come a year, 2 years later, release something else quietly, and effectively resolve it. So who knows? Again, it is interesting that this is written by a Chinese outlet. Do they know more? I don't know. Is this pure scientific review? Is this all pure chance and adaptation of the virus, mutation of the virus, or is it actually a planned event? I think you could easily argue either way. And knowing all the biological warfare that's going on out there that we really haven't heard much of from any nation, state, or country or military, then it would make sense that they would have the original, the one that does all damage. And once they were done with it, they said, okay, this has served our purposes. Now we're going to send out the thing that's going to kind of put an end to it and stop it all. So again, it's very interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments and listen to the video. And again, let me know what you think, and we'll have a discussion about it. Thanks, guys, for watching. I'll leave it there, and we'll talk to you in the next video.